Hello, class. Welcome to week 4. The focus this week on the readings and the discussion is going to be on analyzing organizational readiness. And this is really the first time that we begin to think about how we're going to bring about this change in the organization. Up to this point, in weeks 1 through 3, we've been focusing on what are the problems of the organization, right? What are the challenges they're having, or sometimes it's opportunities, to grow or to do something good. But a lot of times we're looking at problems, and we're trying to figure out ultimately what is the root cause of the problem, right? And so we went through this process of figuring out what the perceived issue was. We analyzed it, got some data, got some different perspectives. Did our future search meeting, did whatever it is we needed to do to figure out what the problem is, define it, quantify the impact of it, right? Is it really a problem? Is it a significant enough problem that it's worth solving? Or is it one of the millions of little problems that we deal with all the time that really aren't worth the investment and effort and time and money to try to fix? It's just not worth it. We just need to get over it or get past it or put some duct tape on it and move on. But there are other problems that really are serious, that are very impactful, and if we don't fix them, can cause major problems for the organization, or can hold the organization back from having whatever success it's trying to achieve. So that's where we want to focus our attention on, right? And if we can zero in on those types of needs, then we're doing our organizations a big favor by helping everybody stay focused on the changes that really matter, rather than driving everybody crazy with a million change initiatives, most of which don't really go anywhere or do anything. So that's a really big important lesson learned coming out of these first 3 weeks, is being able to distinguish between needs that are worth solving, that are important to solve, ones that are not, getting past the symptoms, right, that we can observe, that we can see, that where things look bad, getting underneath the surface of that to really explore what are the causes, and ultimately what are the root causes. Once we understand that root cause, assuming that we want to go ahead and fix that problem, we apply some design thinking or some other design methodology to help us figure out how to address that problem, right? What would the solution be to that problem that we want to solve, that root cause that we want to address? And so we've spent some time talking about how we go about designing good solutions. And then the third part of it was, okay, so you've got this idea of what the problem is, the root causes, the causes and the root cause. And now you've come up with a solution for how to address it. That's great. But without some support, without some money, without some approvals from senior leaders in your organization, your efforts aren't going to go anywhere, right? They're not going to go past the water cooler. So if you want to marshal an organizational change effort, it's going to require a lot of help, a lot of moving parts to something like that, because you're trying to get the whole organization to move from where they are today to some other future state. And so you need to get approval, you need some support. So you got to pitch your idea to whoever those project sponsors are going to be, and get the green light, which means getting the approval, getting the support, getting the money, whatever it is that you're going to need in order to bring about that change. And so that's the time to ask for it once they give you the green light. So that's what we've been doing up to this point, right? And your business case presentation should reflect all of that all those things I just mentioned, plus all the lessons learned from the course readings and the discussions and so forth. This week, in week 4, we pivot from the business case proposal, and we're going to assume that you got the green light. Congratulations. You got the money, you got the approval, you got the support from senior leadership. Now they're saying to you, okay, great, go make it happen. Now you are the change leader. You're the person in charge of that change initiative that you just proposed, and now they're expecting you to deliver on that. So how do you do that, right? And that's what the rest of this course is all about. So the first part was about decision making, figuring out what to change, and the second part is about figuring out how to change it. So the first step in that process of figuring out how to change it is doing what we in change management refer to as an organizational readiness assessment. And so I'm going to focus on that in a moment here. So I'm going to share my screen because I want to make sure that you're equipped to do that. share my screen. Here we go. So you should be seeing the course page here for week 4. You can see we have some discussions that are going to be going on. You have your peer-to-peer discussions where you will be working with your teams to prepare and practice your presentation so that you can record that soon and get that finalized so that then you can move on to the next presentation, which is really the change strategy. So we don't want to lose all your time focusing on the business case and not get to your change strategy. So make sure that this week you really make significant headway in getting all your slides together, practice your presentation so that you are ready to record by the end of this week, if not sooner. So you got that going on. But in week 4 resources, just briefly introduce these. You'll read them on your own, but the standard, the Association for Change Management Professionals puts out a standards document called the Standards for Change Management. It is, it's a little more technical read, but I think it gives you a sense for what change management professionals are looking at when they're thinking about these organizational readiness assessments. And so make sure you read that carefully to take away from it what are the different factors that you should be looking at within your organization to help you figure out where the support and where the resistance are going to come from within your organization. What's going to help you drive this change forward, and what's going to hold you back? What are the headwinds that you can anticipate? Because if you can anticipate those, then you can plan for them. You can prepare for them. You can do something about them. If you can't see them coming, then they're probably going to bite you in the tuchus. And that is a change management term, getting bitten in the tuchus. It happens all the time because we can't anticipate everything. But we try, and that's what this organizational readiness assessment is. It's about trying to anticipate what are all the things that could go wrong with your change effort. The second part here, the second reading, is the Made to Stick book, which hopefully you've been reading over the last few weeks. So make sure you continue to read that. There should be some insights there that could help you with figuring out how to take your business case and make it something, an idea that's sticky, that will resonate with your audience both in the business case proposal context, and then later when you go to present your change strategy. How do you make this idea something simple and compelling enough that folks want to rally around it? So it's a great book, great asset for that. The Daryl Conner video is just a real brief video that talks about the different roles within a change initiative. So coming out of this week, you should all be very clear on what are the different roles. And when we use a certain term to describe somebody, you know what we're talking about. So very brief video, though. You should just take you a few minutes to go through that. So those are the readings. But what I want to focus on for the rest of this video is on the organizational readiness assessment. And so I'm going to hide this for a sec here and just pull up the project template deck that all of you should be using with your project teams to help you navigate this project, this team project. We've looked at, we started the course looking at this organizational change journey. You've, in the first week, focused on identifying perceived needs, doing a needs analysis to figure out what's the root cause of the problem. And then you moved into solution design, applying design thinking to figure out what that solution set should look like. And then you put together your business case proposal to go after that green light. The change strategy section begins here on slide 16, and you can see the very first thing is this org readiness assessment. There's a screenshot in here of a template that I've put together that I use frequently with my team, and it's in a spreadsheet format. But this is just an example. If you double click on this Excel icon up in the top right, that will open the spreadsheet for you to use. And the idea here is this is a worksheet that you can use on your own to do some analysis to figure this stuff out. And then the conclusions of that analysis you bring down into slide 18, which are what are the findings from your organizational readiness assessment. And that slide 18 is one that I would expect to see in your presentation, in the second presentation, the change strategy presentation. So just go back to the spreadsheet here for a second. I'm going to open up that spreadsheet in Excel. Like I said, you would double click on that to open it. I already have it open. And there are two tabs in the spreadsheet. One is this example, and the other is a blank template for you to use. You can obviously erase stuff from the example and use that, but I've given you a blank template that you can go in and start working with. Well, let me walk you through the template using the example, and hopefully it will make sense to you and you'll be able to use this with your own team project. So there are two sides to the spreadsheet here. There's the Organizational Readiness Assessment, which happens here on the left side, and then the Change Adoption Plan, which happens on the right side. That's where you actually define some strategies that are targeted to different groups within your organization. You know, inside of any organization, you're going to have different departments. You're going to have different levels of organization, where you have individual contributors and supervisors and managers and directors and VPs and whatever. You have different names for them, but there'll be different levels in any given organization, and you'll have different functional silos, right, of people in accounting and finance and marketing and sales and customer service and whatever, right? You got all these different functions, again, different names, and there'll be different details for each project that you're working, because the organizations look different, but all of them have different functional areas. All of them have different levels. And then within that, you have little pockets of people, cultures, ecosystems that form over time inside of the organization. And so what you want to do first is just map out, who are all these people? So, you know, maybe you have 1,000 people that are in your organization. You don't need to list all 1,000 people on your spreadsheet. That would get too cumbersome. But you do want to identify all the different groups that you can anticipate are going to be affected by the change. So in this example, the groups that we're identifying are in sales. We've got sales reps, representatives, salespeople. We've got sales managers. We have sales directors. We have vice presidents of sales, sales executives. And then to the right of that, you can see we've described what behavior changes we're asking of each of those groups, because any org change that you have isn't going to affect everybody the same way. Some people in some departments might be affected in one way. People in another department might be affected in another way. Some people at the lower levels of the organization will be affected this way. At a higher level will be affected differently. So you have to think about that, right? Because you can't just take a one-size-fits-all approach to change, because it just doesn't work. And we've talked about that over the last few weeks, of all the different things that get in the way of organizational change efforts working. And using a one-size-fits-all approach, we know doesn't work. So if you're going to tailor your approach to different groups, you first have to know what those groups are. So sit down, spend some time, break down the groups that are relevant to your project team, to your project, and what are the different behavior changes you're asking of each of those groups to make, given the solution set that you've come up with. And in this case, the org change that we're talking about with these sales reps is having them do individual development plans and having individual development plan conversations with their managers. So the reps are having conversations with their sales managers, and so the sales managers are being asked to initiate those conversations and help and support their sales reps in creating those plans and investing in their professional development. So that's a big ask of the sales managers. With the sales reps, we're also asking them to do stuff. We're asking them to think about their development, their own individual development, and dedicate some time to it, to working with their manager and doing some stuff on their own to figure out a plan for how they're going to grow professionally, and then invest the time into executing that plan. So that's a big lift there too. The sales directors, maybe not so much. You know, they're not as directly involved there. They don't have as many people working for them, and maybe they are not being asked to do quite as much, but they are still being asked to do things. And one of those is to model the behavior that we want to see in the sales managers below them. So if the sales directors will do some of this with their sales managers, maybe the sales managers will do some of this with their sales reps, and so on. So you get the idea. We're asking different behaviors of different groups of people. And it doesn't have to be by level. It can be by function. It can be some other way of breaking up your organization in whatever way makes the most sense and is relevant to what you're trying to do. And you can call them whatever stakeholder groups, you can call them whatever you think makes the most sense. This is really just for you and your team to use to analyze the org readiness. So then in the middle section here, as part of this org assessment, I mean, those first two columns are super helpful right out of the gate, because first of all, just mapping out who the stakeholders are is a great thing to do. by itself if you did nothing else. But then to actually identify the different changes you're asking of each of those groups, that's also a really helpful exercise. It really gives you clarity into what you're asking of people and how this change is potentially going to impact them, which we've talked about is a really important thing to do and often not done. But now we're going to, in this middle section, we're going to do a little bit of a risk analysis. And what we're trying to figure out is what groups would be most open to this change and maybe even supportive of it and helpful, and what groups would be least supportive and perhaps even resistant to the change, to the point where we really need to come up with a strategy that targets a specific group or groups in order to get them on board with what we're trying to do. Right? So this is how we anticipate the bumps on the road. So first column here, relative impact, relates to the impact of this change. So as I mentioned, this particular example is all about development conversations. We're asking the sales managers to drive those conversations. And so the impact really falls most heavily on them. They're the ones who are going to have to spend the most amount of time learning how to do this. They're going to have to push their sales reps to do it at first. And they're going to have to initiate the conversations, drive the conversations, follow up on the conversations. Right? It's a lot of it, it's on them. Then the next group that's most impacted would be the sales reps. And so, I gave a 3 to the sales managers, a 2 for the sales reps. And then the sales directors, we're asking them to model the behavior and do some of this work with their sales managers. So they'll be affected by it pretty heavily too. And so they get a 2. Whether they're impacted as much as the sales reps is debatable, but it's close enough for what we're trying to do. And then the fourth group, the sales executives, the VPs, they're the ones who are least impacted because they're not going to be doing a lot of this stuff themselves. They're going to be championing the effort and trying to get everybody else in their groups and their sales groups to do this stuff. So the impact is relatively low for them. So you can see how that starts to break down. And we've color-coded this spreadsheet because that just helps us when we have 20 or 30 groups here to look at. It's helpful to have it color-coded. The next column focuses on risk, the alignment risk. So to what extent are we asking these people to do something that is not aligned with their day-to-day responsibilities? So the sales reps, they are out there selling. That's what they do. They operate independently out in the field. So asking them to sit down with their manager and focus on development time is very much outside of their focus. So we're asking them to do something outside their focus, which it means it's going to feel like a much bigger burden for them. They're going to be much more likely to be resistant because we're asking them to do something that they may at first see as a waste of time, as not relevant to their job. So that one I put a 3 down because that is a high risk situation. Same with the sales managers. Sales managers are out there driving sales, right? They're trying to push their salespeople to sell. So having a development conversation about their long-term development, what do you want to be when you grow up and how can I help you get there? That's not them. That's not what they do. So that's a big shift that we're asking them to make. For the sales directors and sales executives, it's less out of alignment with them because they are broader. They have broader view of the organization and they have a more long-term focus. And so they're not as focused on hitting numbers every week and every month. They are thinking more along quarters and hitting numbers for the year and how are we going to grow this sales organization over the next couple of years. So their thinking is different. And so their strategic alignment with this change is different. So that's why they get a 1 because their alignment is much closer to what we're trying to do. We apply the same sort of thinking for these other categories here. Cultural risk, is the change that we're asking them to make here, is it in alignment or out of alignment with their organizational culture within that group? So within a sales culture, is it normal to have development conversations? No, it's not their thing. It's very much, it's a very touchy-feely thing to do for a group of people that's usually not very touchy-feely, right? So you can imagine that would not be a high cultural alignment there. So we rate that as a high risk. Same with capacity. Do they have the capacity? In other words, do they have spare time to focus on this? And no, the answer is no. Salespeople are out there selling all the time, and they're very busy selling, and there's really very little room in their schedules to do things that are not selling. So capacity is a bit of an issue for them. And capabilities are a bit of an issue for them because they're not trained in this. It's not something that comes naturally to them. If you were asking an accountant to do math stuff, well, that's pretty aligned with their capabilities, right? But when you're asking an accountant to do touchy-feely stuff, that might be a little bit, you know, if you ask an accountant to design an advertising campaign, that's a bit outside of their capabilities, right? So you're going to run into some resistance. And likewise here, if you're asking people to do something that they're not really trained for and it doesn't come naturally for them, then you're introducing more risk. So by defining these different risks, we can see where the high risk areas are. This column I just averages out those 4 risks into one number, and it doesn't average them out, it adds them up for you. And then you can compare that risk factor and that relative impact. The higher the impact and the higher the risk, the bigger overall priority this is for us from a change management standpoint. The more that we're going to need to do from a change management standpoint to address this group, because the impact is high and the risk is high. When the impact is low and the risk is low, there's not that much that we need to do for them. And so for those groups where the impact and the risk factor are relatively low, there's maybe not so much that we need to do to change their minds and to get them to adopt the change. And so that's where this column J comes in. It's multiplying relative impact times risk factor to give you a number, a single number that you can use to sort your whole spreadsheet here, to identify the ones with the biggest number, the highest CM priority. They're the ones that float to the top. They're the ones you really have to focus your attention on from a change management standpoint. The ones that are low, they're the ones you focus the least amount of change management effort on. And in fact, those folks that are very low in terms of CM priority, those might be people who you'd be able to leverage to help you with the change, right? So these VPs, for example, have very low number of 4, their CM priority. It's not that I want to ignore them. I'm just simply saying you're not going to do a lot to change their minds because they're already pretty well aligned. So it's a pretty easy business case to make for them. So now what you want to do is, can we figure out how to use these sales executives to influence these other groups that maybe are more resistant? How can I get them to not only go along with the change, but help me as an ally? So, so that's why we look at that. And then, so that's enough, once you get through column J, that's enough for your organizational readiness assessment. That's all you need to focus on for this part of it. Column L, there is your change adoption plan, and that's really a week 5 conversation where we start to talk about change adoption and different strategies for doing that. So you want to save that, I think, for week 5 and taking a look at that once we have figured out some strategies that we can use to leverage these folks. But for now, organizational readiness assessment, if you just do columns B through J, that gives you a really good sense of where the resistance is coming from, where your allies could be coming from, and you've got groups now defined so that you can begin to formulate a plan for how you're going to address the change needs of each group. So that's what you want to hope. That's what you're hoping to accomplish with an org readiness assessment. The Association for Change Management Professionals standards document is very much aligned with this, and will give you some additional things to think about organizationally about what could impact, either derail your change, undermine your change, could be a risk to your change. And so you want to think about those as well. But this gets you about 75% of the way there. And the standards document will provide the other 25%. So that is the example. There's a template tab that you can use to go in and start populating with your own groups. And I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to go through this exercise with your project team for your project. It will help you. Other teams in the past have said that it's helped them quite a bit in terms of figuring out how the change impacts the different groups and what they might need to do in order to to get those different groups on board with the change. So, so definitely spend some time with your team working through this, even maybe in parallel with finishing up your business case proposal. So that's it. That's week 4 in a nutshell. Those readings, the discussion, the work that you're doing with your team on the business case proposal, and then in parallel, this new stuff that we're doing here with the organizational readiness assessment and thinking about how the change will impact those different stakeholder groups in your stakeholder map. So hopefully that's been helpful. If you have questions, I'm here. Reach out to me. I have office hours, but I'm happy to schedule time with you to help you in any way I can. So thank you and have a great week. Take care.